striving for superiority feeds a sense of inferiority and therefore a sense of self-loathing.
I am the greatest by Cassius Clay. This is the legend of Cassius Clay, the most beautiful fighter in the world today.
That's Muhammad Ali. No, not the Egyptian peasant who discovered the so-called Gnostic Gospels in 1945, the other really famous one who did some boxing. He was born Cassius Clay and later changed his name to Muhammad Ali, and then later became known by the other moniker, the Greatest. And fair enough, Ali is widely regarded as the greatest heavyweight boxing champion of all time, though some place Joe Louis at number 1 and Ali at number 2. What we just heard was the opening of his 1963 spoken word album, I Am the Greatest, recorded while he was still Cassius Clay. We'll put a link to the full poem in the show notes. It's fun. Ali often used poetry as psychological warfare, who would have thunk, trying to rattle his opponents before he even stepped into the ring. Before fighting Sonny Liston in 1964, he boasted, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. His hands can't hit what his eyes can't see." Muhammad Ali was driven to be the greatest. And in sport, that sort of feels right. We want the winners. We put athletes on pedestals. We want them to be great, even the greatest. It makes for a spectacle. And frankly, it's a lot of fun watching people at the very top of their game. But my guest today wants us to think more deeply about all of this stuff. Is striving to be the greatest actually good for us? Miroslav Volf, one of the greatest theologians of our day, perhaps ironically, he says, nah, we probably shouldn't. Striving for excellence is healthy. Striving for superiority, needing to be better than others, isn't good for us or for society. I'm John Dickson, and this is Undeceptions. Every episode at Undeceptions, we explore some aspect of life, faith, history, science, culture, or ethics that's either much misunderstood or mostly forgotten. With the help of people who know what they're talking about, we're trying to undeceive ourselves and let the truth out. Your new book, you're saying that Christianity it charts a path between giving up on this world and its wonderful pursuits and achievements, and ambition, understood as striving to be superior over others. Can you give us the thesis in a nutshell before we really drill down into some of these extraordinary ideas?
Yeah. So I became increasingly persuaded that striving for superiority, and by that I mean striving to be better than others, as a kind of a governing striving in our lives, even though it is pervasive, it qualifies almost all domains of our culture. Think of education, for instance, think of politics, think of economics. think of even arts, and of course, think of sports, and you can add more. All of them are predicated on this attempt to be better than others, and we expect from this both entertainment and a kind of betterment of the human condition in many ways. It's a feature of a current state of modernity.
That's Miroslav Volf, Henry B. Wright Professor of Theology and Director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale University. In a previous episode, I called him one of our greatest living theologians, but after working on this episode, I'm questioning the use of that term.
And I've come to believe that this is deeply problematic. What's deeply problematic is not so much our striving. What's deeply problematic is also not striving for excellence. What is problematic and kind of an empty value is striving to be better than somebody else, or striving to be better than anyone, being the greatest of all times or something of that sort. It twists the character of our achievement, character of our lives, and has tremendous negative consequences.
Striving for superiority isn't just a modern thing, even if, as Miroslav argues, it's more ingrained in modern society. In his book, he points to the poetry of the ancient Greek poet Hesiod, roughly 700 BC. Hesiod's account of the goddess Eris gives us a glimpse into an early understanding of rivalry, of the urge to get ahead. Eris is basically the Greek word for strife or rivalry. In Hesiod's telling, there are two forms of Eris. A bad one, associated with conflict and destruction, and a good one, which spurs on competition, hard work, innovation. Here's how he describes the good Eris.
She drives even the unskilled man to work, and if someone who lacks property sees someone else who is rich, he likewise hurries off to sow and plant and set his house in order. Neighbour competes with neighbour for prosperity. This Eris is good for men.
Compare that, says Volf, with a similarly ancient text, the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. All toil and all skill in work come from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Hesiod says striving for superiority is a good thing. The writer of Ecclesiastes says not so much. Good or bad, it's clear that striving for superiority has been around for a while. Enlightenment philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau pointed to striving for superiority as the foundation of human inequality, the driver of one-upmanship. The person striving for superiority lives, quote, only in the opinion of others. He derives the sentiment of his own existence solely from their judgment. Listen to this and tell me this isn't a 300-year-old prediction of social media.
Everything is being reduced to appearances. Everything becomes contrivance and play acting. Honour, friendship, virtue, and often even vices in which one at length discovers the secret of glorying. How, in a word, forever asking others what we are, without ever daring to ask it of ourselves, in the midst of so much philosophy, humanity, politeness, and sublime maxims, we have nothing more than a deceiving and frivolous exterior. Honour without virtue, reason without wisdom, and pleasure without happiness. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Second Discourse.
Social media embodies that almost through and through. Am I right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you want to be kind of specific, the psychological health, especially of teenage girls, suffers greatly. Those curated images with which one compares one everyday frumpy self and inability to kind of catch up with that, read down to us feeling ourselves only as inferior. And then come these moments when there seem to be rewards, when we get enough likes or whatever it's equivalent to those likes, and then we feel ourselves that we are somebody, but it immediately follows with this almost in extreme cases with self-loathing. I'm inadequate, and it's kind of feeds the entirety of the culture, broadly construed, of striving for superiority, feeds a sense of inferiority and therefore a sense of self-loathing, partly because now, since the world is in our living room, we measure ourselves with those who can portray themselves in the best possible light from anywhere almost in the world.
Striving for superiority may be ancient, but it looks different today. It is arguably even more pervasive than ever. Capitalism has kind of changed the rules of the game. Productivity, efficiency, and achievement are front and centre. On some level, we're all competing to succeed. But to what end? Wolf argues that we've lost a clear sense of excellence in itself. Instead, we judge our success by comparing ourselves with others. We no longer measure ourselves against an objective standard, but against the people around us. As Wolf says, striving for superiority is everywhere. So you better stay with us. This episode of Undeceptions is brought to you by the New Living Translation from Tyndale House. Tyndale first published its New Living Translation of the Bible, the NLT for short, back in 1996. They employed a team of over 100 Bible scholars who worked with the earliest Hebrew, Aramaic and Greek texts to bring the NLT to life. The result is a razor-accurate, super readable English translation that this year celebrates its 30th anniversary. And honestly, I recommend this translation if you're not even sure about the Christian faith. I think you'll find it really meaningful. With the NLT, Tyndale House is continuing the legacy of its namesake, William Tyndale. In the 16th century, he produced the first direct English translation of the Bible from the original Greek and Hebrew. And honestly, this is a translation I recommend, especially if you're not sure what to make of the Christian faith. It's one that is accurate, but it really opens what it means for us today. Try it for yourself. Visit Tyndale.com and use the code POD30, all caps, at checkout for 30% off any NLT Bible. That's Tyndale.com, code POD number 30. The Democratic Republic of Congo is currently in the midst of an escalating Ebola outbreak. With a death rate between 30 and 50%, it's a dangerous moment for a population already suffering from ongoing civil war. Anglican Aid is on the ground near the epicentre of the outbreak, working with churches and a network of health clinics to prevent the spread of this disease. They need your help to continue, so please consider donating to its Emergency Relief Fund. Head to anglicanaid.org.au/undeceptions. That's anglicanaid.org.au/undeceptions. Every donation makes a difference.
Once upon a time, there was a lily that stood in an isolated spot beside a small brook and was well known to some nettles and also to a few other small flowers nearby. The lily was, according to the Gospel's truthful account, more beautifully clothed than Solomon in all his glory, and in addition was joyful and free of care all the day long.
That's the beginning of a parable from the 19th century Danish philosopher and friend of the pod, Søren Kierkegaard, found in his book, Upbuilding Discourses in Various Spirits. Man, they don't give us titles like that anymore. He's riffing off Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which you can read in the Gospel of Matthew. But there's this little bit where Jesus says, "Why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They don't toil, neither do they spin, yet I tell you that even Solomon, in all his glory, was not dressed like one of these."
One of the most interesting stories that or renderings of this issue I draw from his comments, almost like sermonic comments on the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the story of the beautiful lily. Consider the lilies in the field. Even Solomon wasn't dressed as one of those. And Jesus mentions also birds, and then Kierkegaard's imagination is absolutely incredible. So he has a bird and the lily, talking bird, naughty bird, who's seen everything in the world flying up in the air, talks to the little lily, which is happily living by and growing by some brook, and starts telling her about those lilies somewhere away, even crown imperial lilies, the best lilies in the world.
It so happened that one day a little bird came and visited the lily. This little bird was a naughty bird. Instead of putting itself in the lily's place, instead of delighting in its loveliness and delighting in its innocent bliss, the bird would show off in its feeling of freedom by making the lily feel its lack of freedom. Not only that, but the little bird was also chatty and talked fast and loose, truthfully and untruthfully, about how in other places there were entirely different gorgeous lilies in great abundance, places where there were a rapture and merriment, a fragrance, a brilliance of colours, a singing of birds that were beyond all description.
And everybody, every time the friend comes, the bird, Lily feels worse about herself until they finally decide, well, maybe the bird should peck around my roots, the roots of the lily, pick up gingerly the lily and carry her where those crown imperial lilies are, so she can bask and can somehow reflect the glory upon herself.
"And then, to look as inferior as I do," said the lily to itself, "to be as insignificant as the little bird says I am. Oh, why did I not come into existence some other place, under other conditions? Why did I not become a crown imperial?" The little bird had told it that of all the lilies, the crown imperial was regarded as the most beautiful and was the envy of all other lilies.
And the morale of the story need not be drawn. As the bird was flying, the lily withered. And it's not just that in this flying to them, it withered. It started withering even as she was contemplating, seduced by the bird, her own inferiority. And it's a wonderful story set against the backdrop when Jesus says, "Do not worry what you should wear." And Kierkegaard takes it do not worry about to have something to wear, but do not worry as we do worry these days, right? When we worry, most of us don't worry whether we have anything, though there are plenty of people like that as well. Many of us worry, what is it that should make us look actually in some ways good, superior, better than others, so they can divert eyes from somebody else to ourselves.
Whenever I've been in your presence, I worry that my socks are not the equal of your socks. And anyone who's seen you in public will know what I mean.
I have wizened a little bit and don't choose them as carefully as I used to.
In comparing itself to others, the lily forgets its own intrinsic glory. It feels the anguish of perceived inferiority. It strives for superiority and withers. Wolf says this is a real problem for human beings as social creatures. As soon as there are other people, their differences make us question ourselves. For the 17th century English poet John Milton, striving for superiority is at the heart of the human condition. More than that, it's the condition of Satan striving for preeminence over God.
Who first seduced them to that foul revolt? The infernal serpent. He it was whose guile stirred up with envy and revenge, deceived the mother of mankind. What time his pride had cast him out from heaven, with all his host of rebel angels, by whose aid aspiring to set himself in glory above his peers, he trusted to have equalled the Most High. If he opposed, and with ambitious aim against the throne and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven, and battle proud with vain attempt. Him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion, down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire, who durst defy the omnipotent to arms. John Milton, Paradise Lost, Book 1.
It's very dramatic. Great reading. But what truths are there for us? I want to move to John Milton. Very, very different context. Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. What does he bring to this theme?
Yeah, so I think that he reads almost the entire history of saving history and history of fall and salvation through these lens of striving for superiority. And you see it very, very much paradigmatically enacted in the striving of the second one in heaven, namely Lucifer, to be equal to and in some ways also surpass God. And so, especially as the second one, he could not stand his inferiority to somebody who is above him, and his entire endeavor then becomes that of striving that is self-defeating, and he knows that it's self-defeating, that he can never quite be
self-deception has to play a role here, doesn't it?
Yeah, certainly it does, and certain kind of almost captivity to it, which so well illustrates what's happening with us, even when we are not aware that slithers, that notion that we somehow have to be better than others, slithers into us, and we can get rid of it even when we're aware of it. And Satan knows that the service to God is easy. God wants nothing more than genuine gratitude. Gratitude in joy, not return, but just gratitude as return. And yet, he cannot abide the second position, right? And kind of Milton goes then through fall of Adam and Eve, reads them from that perspective.
It's Eve's competition with Adam, her lamenting her inferiority.
That's right, because she was created inferior, and Satan plays on this.
Just chiming in here to note that this is Milton's 17th century view. Miroslav makes absolutely clear that Milton is wrong to see Eve as inferior, even if his account has some illuminating insights into human competitiveness. Just wanted to clear that up.
And the goal of Satan, of course, is in order to spoil God's world so that somehow he would increase his own kingdom and perhaps, and that's what Milton puts, perhaps be even greater than God's. So even after he has fallen, he has the same kind of aspiration. And then Milton also reads the main thrust of Christ's work as being enacted in the course of temptations of Christ, and those temptations circle around again this sense of being the greatest, wanting to be the greatest, and Jesus withstands temptations, and then the Satan falls from the pinnacle of heaven where he has taken Jesus in order to tempt him. So it was, in a sense, another fall of Satan and defeat of him that is kind of sketched in Paradise Regained.
So Satan is defeated twice in his attempted striving for superiority over God, and then in Christ's redeeming of the race of Adam and Eve. But some might say God himself is the true supremacist, always ensuring that everyone is put in their place compared to him. Well, that would sort of work for the ancient Zeus, king of the gods, but not for the one God of the Bible, as Miroslav points out.
What does it mean for God to glorify himself? What does the word glorify even mean? I mean, yeah, so theologically or sociologically, speak to that.
Yeah, so one way to think about God's glory is that God is the supreme being who seeks to soak up all the glory. That is to say, our function or creature's function in this view is to deflect all the glory that may be anywhere and trace it back to God so that God would be elevated, made higher. Kind of the major problem with this is that God cannot be made higher. That is to say that God always, from the beginning to the end, and every time, all the time in between, is the one who is the highest. And it kind of also pushes against the idea that we have to have revealed in Jesus Christ. And that is that you see it at the end of John's Gospel. You see it also in Philippians. And that is to say that humiliation of God in doing the work of salvation is God's glory, right? And once you start thinking of it in those terms, you realize that God's glory is precisely this glory of his infinite love. Luther, I love this thing from Luther in his commentary on the Magnificat, on the Mary's song in Luke's Gospel, when she comes to Elizabeth and she's pregnant. My soul magnifies the Most High, and then Luther starts this piece and says, well, God is the Most High. Since God is the Most High, God cannot look upwards, because there's nobody upwards. Since God is the Most High, God cannot look sideways, because there's no one who is equal to him. When God looks down. And the further you are from God, the more he attends to you. And I thought, oh, what an incredible, absolutely simple and incredible way to speak about this unconditional love of God. And then he contrasts that in the next page. You turn the page, and then he talks about how human beings are. We come to a party. He doesn't mention party, but similar kind of situation, maybe church in his case or whatever other group of people. And as soon as we are there, we look who's the most prominent. And somehow we can meet that person, talk to that person. We are climbing our ways up wherever we find ourselves. God does exact opposite. And so in that sense, God Almighty himself is the example of the humility which for which Christian faith stands. He lowers himself so that he can lift us up, and that's his glory.
One of the things I had to read a couple of times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I was quite moved by it, was your discussion, or Milton's discussion, of God seeking his own glory, and your discussion of that, and why God's seeking of his own glory is not the same negative thing as our seeking glory. Can you unpack that for us? Because it's really moving. And sometimes skeptics throw this at us that, oh, God's just looking for his own glory. He's no better than a despot.
Yeah, the glory of God is the human being who lives with integrity and humility. So it's not somehow elevating God and abasing oneself, but rather living in the fullness of the beauty of what it means to be human, undaunted by any comparisons with others, and with integrity that is truly a way to glorify God and is what God glories in.
Yet so much bounty is in God, such grace, that who advances his glory, not their own, then he himself to glory will advance. John Milton, Paradise Regained, Book 3.
The Apostle Paul, you move back 15 centuries and you end up with Paul. He's often accused of, being sexist and reinforcing hierarchy and so on, yet you draw on him as one of the richest resources for your theme.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this question of self-worth, to use modern terminology, I think he's just about the best. I think, in fact, that both Milton and Kierkegaard, who are superb in very different ways, both draw on him and draw on this amazing passage from Philippians about Christ, who does not hold on to equality with God, but becomes a servant. It is an amazingly fruitful text.
You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Philippians chapter 2, New Living Translation.
But this is the kind of center, so to speak, of Paul's concern, both his instructions to his churches, say Romans and Corinthians in later parts of them, and also his struggle with some of the opponents, especially in 2 Corinthians, but in his writing also in Romans 3 and 4, in particularly articulating the character of salvation. They're all about absence of boasting. And it comes against the backdrop of his own sense of righteousness, his own sense that he had to morally perform. And indeed, in some ways, he felt compulsion to morally outperform others, to be at the best that he could be, and that was always better than somebody else. And Paul kind of pushes there. And I think my favorite passage in this regard is what he says in 1 Corinthians 4, when he asks this rhetorical question, what do you have that you have not received? And of course, to boast, you have to think that you have something that you have not received. And then he immediately asks, well, if you have received it, why then do you boast? What makes you better than somebody else? Everything that you have received. And even if you want to quarrel with Paul here and say, well, maybe I've contributed something, I always say so. Let's take my example. So I write a book. That's some kind of an achievement, little achievement, right? I have a job. That's kind of a little bit of an achievement. And if I ask the question, what percentage of that achievement is my own? And if I really honestly think about it, I would say maybe 2-3%. That's mine. The rest, and even that I've received from God, right? But the rest I've received from I don't know how many people. that surround me, that preceded me. And the trick is that I can't even tell you which 2 or 3% that is.
The socks.
The socks.
Miroslav Volf is first and foremost a theologian. He's certainly a great philosopher and cultural critic, but he's a theologian who has a knack for showing why deeply Christian ideas have existential significance. And this is clear in his discussion of justification by faith. Now, this ultimately comes from the Apostle Paul in the 1st century, but it was at the heart of Augustinian theology. That's the thinking of Augustine of Hippo in the late 4th, early 5th centuries. And it was the spark that lit the flame of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. Basically, justification by faith means that God considers us right with him, just or righteous, not through external markers like circumcision or kosher food laws, nor through moral achievements like obeying the 10 Commandments, but simply by entrusting ourselves to divine mercy. You'll find this built into the Old Testament law itself. It's a myth to say the Old Testament was all about good deeds and the New Testament all about grace. So in the Old Testament, you get the Day of Atonement written into the law of Israel. That's the day that all sins were forgiven. You also find it in the songs of the Old Testament, like where King David, 1,000 years before Jesus, sings in Psalm 51, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions." But honestly, apart from a bunch of texts in the letters of Paul, perhaps my favourite rendition of justification by faith comes from a parable Jesus told.
2 men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a despised tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer: "I thank you, God, that I am not like other people, cheaters, sinners, adulterers. I'm certainly not like the tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give you 1/10 of my income." But the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner." I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, New Living Translation.
Man, I love that. You beautifully tie this into Paul's radical notion of, well, the Christian doctrine of justification through faith, that really you bring nothing, and even faith is a gift. Can you connect that, what sounds like esoteric salvation theology, with the very practical issue that you're talking about?
You know, it's really far from esoteric theology. It's really at the heart of every human being's identity. First, let's start with creation. The fact that we are creatures means that we are given to ourselves by God. It means, to go back to that pen that my father gave me, it means that we are in a particular way precious to God, and in a way precious to ourselves. And then you have the same idea that we are completely restored to ourselves. We are being kept in a right relationship to God by the sheer act of God's giving without our contribution. Our being is a given being rather than achieved being. And think about this. If I need to always achieve myself, that's what this book is pushing against. I need to always to know that I've achieved myself. I measure myself against others. And you are on that treadmill and you're constantly moving and constantly staying on the same place existentially. Whereas doctrine of justification, or the fact that we are unconditionally loved and affirmed and held by God, is such a liberating message. Think of it this way. I think of it sometimes this way. Every time we get up, we stand before the mirror and we need to perform ourselves, make ourselves into something. And the whole day we need to perform because we're constantly being judged by others. Our worth is being assessed. And if our worth is in our looks, in our achievement, we're constantly under pressure. Freed from this idea that our worth comes from our achievement, we are truly free.
Okay, this is a freeing thought. But if I'm not striving for superiority, what should I be doing? Isn't there a danger these theological insights will get in the way of genuine human achievement?
Where is the line between striving to be superior and just bettering yourself?
Well, I mean, I realize that sometimes it's hard, and our psychology is such that sometimes it's hard to draw precise lines. But I think one way to do so is to ask, who are you competing with? Are you competing with yourself? Or are you competing with somebody else? And it seems to me, and the second question that I would ask is, do you have an ideal of excellence to which you are committed? Or does what is excellent come to you simply through competitive performance of those who are considered to be best in that field? We do have fields where that's the case. That often the best, the only way to know what excellence is to see the best player, right? There are no independent criteria in some ways. But if you take these two criteria, you can apply one in all domains, another one maybe in some domains. I think that helps quite a bit, at least it helps me to kind of draw this line. And my point is also not in this book, we can rid ourselves completely of that vice, which I think it is vice. I think my sense is we can come to the point and make it a point of our striving for sanctification, to use an old term, where that's not a dominant value for us, where that's there and we're aware and we deal with it, but it doesn't infest important domains of our lives. Where we are kind of embarrassed about the idea, as I am sometimes embarrassed. This is crazy. There's something yucky about this, that you want to be always better than others. What's wrong with you, Miroslav? I say to myself, right? And so with some of those practical considerations and those two rules, I kind of muddle through life.
Selah is a Hebrew word often associated with an intentional pause. And that's how Selah, the travel company, run their tours. They're for people who want to go deeper and learn about the incredible history of Christianity around the world. Walk in the footsteps of amazing medieval figures like the Venerable Bede across the landscapes of Scotland and Northern England. Man, I'd like to do that one. Or along the way with the Apostle Paul through Turkey, Greece, Malta and Rome. I want to do that one as well. Or if you haven't had enough of me, I'll be taking a group of my besties around the Holy Land, the state of Israel and Palestine, later this year for 2 weeks, visiting the key sites of Jesus' life as we explore the origins of Christianity. But getting quick, these tours have limited numbers, so we can all get to know each other better. Hope to see you. Book your tour now at selah.au. That's SELAH.au. See you there.
I'm obsessed with this tall poppy syndrome thing too, because this is a term that no one knows about. It's strictly Australian and New Zealand, and Dom's the one that taught me about it. And he said Australians are just naturally a humble people.
Yeah.
Because is the tall poppy syndrome, is that a good thing, or is it like an ego death thing, or is it that you guys hold yourselves back because you're scared of judgment from others?
I think it's that you don't want to toot your own horn too much.
Yes.
Australians have a perpetual fear of cringe. So when you see someone who's actually going for it.
I noticed that big time.
Yeah,
Australians.
who is like being successful. It's almost like we love an underdog.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm not speaking on, but it's almost like we love an underdog, and then someone maybe gets a little bit, you can't get too big for your boots.
That's a TikTok clip from Triple J, a radio station within Australia's national broadcaster, the ABC. Journo Lucy Smith chats with American DJ John Summit about the cultural phenomenon found in Australia and New Zealand called the tall poppy syndrome. It's the tendency to cut others down for their achievements. Some people might justify the tall poppy syndrome as a reaction against boasting or self-promotion of the tall poppy, the person who is achieving and maybe big-noting their success. It reflects the Aussie values of equality, humility, and the idea that everyone should get a fair go. Others argue it's actually just a form of envy, or even inverted snobbery. Is that all we're talking about here? Are Christians afraid of success, against progress, against innovation? Is this whole episode a case of the tall poppy syndrome? Well, Friedrich Nietzsche might have something to say on all of this. The desire of the weak to cut down the strong.
You're an authority on Nietzsche. You're one of the people that really understands Nietzsche. I remember asking, you will have forgotten it, but I remember asking you in Sydney about Nietzsche. And you said, well, there are several views. And I thought, okay, I don't understand Nietzsche after all. But I want to ask you, what would Nietzsche say to your book?
That's very interesting. Interesting question. You know, strangely enough, originally I had Nietzsche as an interlocutor planned in the book, but the book was growing too much, and I decided, okay, I won't use him.
Didn't he, in places like Genealogy of Morals and The Antichrist, didn't he critique the way Christianity, Judaism, Christianity, Paul, subverted the noble classical virtues because it wanted to preserve what nature wanted to discard. You know, Paul talks of giving honor to the lowest things. Isn't that something Nietzsche really thought was illogical?
Yes. He thought it was unnatural.
Transvaluation of values.
Yeah. He basically thought that that's going to make human beings weaker. That's going to preserve that which is weak at the expense of the strong, and it won't give you kind of competitive advantage in certain ways. You won't be able. You're not striving anymore. You're just helping somebody. That's why, for him, empathy is rather a problematic virtue.
Christianity is called the religion of pity. Pity stands in antithesis to the tonic emotions which enhance the energy of the feeling of life. It has a depressive effect. One loses force when one pities. Pity, on the whole, thwarts the law of evolution, which is the law of selection. Pity preserves what is ripe for destruction. Friedrich Nietzsche, The Antichrist, 1895.
You're very clear in the book that Jesus didn't invent this concept. You show beautifully that it's really a Hebraic Jewish idea long before it's picked up by Jesus. However, you do end up saying Jesus is the clearest embodiment of this principle. Is that just what you'd expect from a Christian theologian?
Maybe, maybe maybe I'm just blind to my own prejudices in this regard. But it would seem to me that it's expressed in the clearest way and then embodied in a matchless way. A way that is so radical that some people shy away from valorizing it as something really, really important. But you have it in the Hebrew Bible. Certainly, this has been prepared for us there, and we ought to celebrate it there. And I love the example, and one of my favorite Hebrew Bible scholars, Jewish, John Levinson. He reads this passage where Deuteronomist asks to reflect on why did God love Israel, and then basically says it's not because of some achievement of Israel, simply because God has fallen in love with Israel, which is to say a certain way of describing a choice of God. God loved Israel not on account of any achievement of Israel, but simply on account of God's love. That's also what motivates God's creation, and that's what motivates God's choice of Israel. And even with Abraham, some scholars push against what I'm going to say right now, but even with Abraham, you don't have any explanation what it was that made God choose Abraham. It just comes out of blue. God calls Abraham. And I think in these ideas, we see that achievement is not the principle on which God operates and relates to human beings. Now, when it comes to Jesus, that becomes exponentially emphasized. And it's emphasized in the sense that achievement is that humility of service. That's what constitutes achievement. So the radicality of love becomes kind of inverse achievement, not something that you pat yourself on the back, but precisely something that is made possible by that very God who values humility.
To end his book, Miroslav offers 24 theses, a summary, if you like, of why we might think again about striving for superiority. This one caught my attention. One of the most revolutionary injunctions in the New Testament, a key aspect of the excellence to which the followers of Christ should aspire, is that each person in a community should treat all others as if they were superior to themselves. Superior not in achievement, but in importance. Obedience to this injunction is likely the best way to subvert striving for superiority and the resulting hierarchies of honour, which all depend more on relative than absolute differences.
How do we change the way the media seems to completely trash anything that is Christian?
Well, partly by having conversations like this, I suspect. Let's hear from Miroslav on it.
Some of our Australian listeners will remember Miroslav Volf on ABC's Q&A program, a prime time pretty scary event. I don't remember you feeling scared, but it's like the Areopagus of Australian TV.
I know.
With a host that is very critical of Christianity. But it was wonderful. But you made a statement that struck everyone, including atheist host Tony Jones. You said Christianity flourishes best from the margins, or something like that.
Yeah.
Does that mean persecution? I mean this sort of just following your line of thought. Persecution can actually be good for you.
Well, you can make good out of persecution, right? But for the church, where I was heading with this comment, is for the church to be marginal. Isn't that bad of a thing? Church was born as a marginal institution. For many centuries, it stayed as a marginal institution. And I think if we are detached from power, we can see things much more clearly. We can project authentic Christian vision much better. I think it's healthy for the church to learn how to live from the margins and contribute from the margins to the well-being of society.
Let's hear Billy on that. Well,
and so now, as I read this latest book, I want to ask, what do you want to say to churches that are anxious about losing their superiority in culture and so on?
I think it's a really wrong aspiration to acquire back superiority. In fact, I was thinking just this morning, about this very, very question. I just wish. I always say to myself, I bemoan that Jesus Christ has become our moral stranger. I don't bemoan the loss of Christian culture. Christian culture has its good sides, but it had its bad sides, downsides, significant downsides. I want to see Jesus and the life that he led, kind of the radicality of his service to every human being. His critique of hypocrisy, which pervades our life. His critique of wealth. I wish that we would rediscover that. His critique of fame, too. And I can go on. I wish we would rediscover this and not worry about what happens to us. Be content to be where we are and be content to be at margins. I come from the church that was mildly persecuted. That was my growing up. But I'm always struck, even now, when I read the Gospels, how often, not just Gospels, the whole entire New Testament, how often expectation of persecution rather than of cultural dominance is what early church had without any complaint about it. And so that's what I wish for us. And even there's in First Peter, which is written to persecuted community. Again, not heavily, but certainly heavily disadvantaged. There's no encouragement for them to fight for being tolerated. That's going to come later, and I don't think it's a bad idea. But you have very clearly in that text that you should honor everyone. Not seek to be honored, but honor. And honor not just the king, who is your superior, your ruler, but honor everyone. And I think there's something really beautiful about this, and we should have courage to stand by this moral beauty of the Christian message and not worry about cultural dominance.
What does all this have to say to the skeptic who doesn't believe in the Jesus narrative? What advice or wisdom do you think there is in this concept you're pursuing?
Well, a skeptic might be scandalized. Jesus was, we see there was prophecy, but at the very beginning, sign contested. There's both a promise of world's salvation, and a contested sign. So my sense is that there are some people who are going to contest, and there's reason for contestation. And we don't, we somehow have this idea that if we would just performed rightly, we would be embraced. And I don't think Jesus had that. Or we would persuade others. And I don't think that's a valid expectation. And in that sense, I would say our job is to be faithful. Our job is to articulate the message in as convincing way as we can. And if we sketch the vision of a life, very few people will actually say it's not beautiful. They may say it's unrealizable. They may say it's going to get you in trouble.
Or Christians don't look like that.
There we go. Exactly. Whatever. But it's going to have power, and I'm interested in that kind of power.
Next episode. Kaley, tell me, what's your ambition for next episode?
Well, we're going to go back to the 6th century BC, which is almost as far back as I think we've ever been, and the beginnings of the spiritual but not religious phenomena. Talking about secret cults, Gnosticism, enchantment, the New Age, and how Christianity stacks up.
Great. Undeceptions is hosted by me, John Dickson, produced by Kaley Payne, and directed by Mark Littlebird Hadley. Alasdair Belling is writer and researcher. Siobhan McGuiness is our online librarian. Lyndie Leviston remains my wonderful assistant. Santino Dimarco is chief finance and operations consultant. Peter Kazushko is our North American representative. Editing by Richard Humwee. Our voice actors today were Dakota Love and Yannick Laurie. Undeceptions is the flagship podcast of undeceptions.com, letting the truth out.
Fly away, little bird, Mark. Tweet, tweet.
I was thinking I was the greatest.
An Undeceptions podcast.